Heartbreaking news for George Hamilton, one of Hollywood's legendary stars, has faced numerous challenges and setbacks throughout his life. However, recent news has left many feeling deeply sympathetic for him. While George has always been known for his strong image and his ability to never give up, he is now confronting a pain that no one could have anticipated. Let's explore what is happening with this icon in the following article. Thank you for watching this video. Did you know about George Hamilton? What do you think about the challenges he's currently facing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exciting videos. Leave a 1 if you've heard of George Hamilton or a 0 if you haven't. We're talking about George Hamilton, the star of Lag A.O., a legend who once had relationships with famous figures like Elizabeth Taylor, lived in the White House, and earned millions of dollars. However, at 85 years old, George Hamilton is now facing the harsh reality. He is struggling to pay his medical bills. Once a symbol of wealth and fame, he recently received the heartbreaking news that his cancer has returned. The wealth that George Hamilton had accumulated throughout his life is now gone. The mansion he had lived in for decades also had to be sold off to cover his medical expenses. From once dating the daughter of a president to now struggling to survive in his old age, the story of George Hamilton is truly a tragic end no one could have predicted. George Hamilton was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1939. His father was a famous band leader from the North, while his mother hailed from Arkansas in the South. The blend of Northern sophistication and Southern charm shaped George's image as he grew up. His childhood was far from peaceful. The family constantly moved due to his father's music career. These early travels helped George cultivate a passion for charm and made him highly adaptable to his surroundings. George wasn't the oldest nor the youngest. He was the middle child in a complex family. Everything changed in 1944 when George's father had an affair with a singer in his band, and their marriage ended in heartbreak. George's mother was left to raise her children on her own during the wartime. At this point, George was only 5 years old. The divorce not only had an emotional impact, but also left deep scars that would affect him throughout his life. After leaving the family, his father moved to New York, abandoning his music career to sell perfume. Tragically, he passed away at a young age in 1957. George's childhood quickly shifted from the glamorous hotels and music scene to a life of survival. After the divorce, George and his siblings moved to Blytheville, Arkansas, to live with their grandparents. For a brief period, they experienced a peaceful and stable life, and it was during this time that George was taught the manners of the South, which would stay with him forever. However, in 1947, both of George's grandparents passed away, and the stability he had just found vanished. His mother was left with no money or support, and the 3 children had to fend for themselves. In her desperation, George's mother had no other choice but to flip a coin to decide their next step. With the coin landing heads up, she decided that they would move to New York and try their luck in Hollywood. That one coin toss changed everything. Although George was only 8 years old at the time, Hollywood became an irresistible calling. The entire family packed up their belongings and set off for California, beginning a new life in the City of Lights. However, the road ahead was full of challenges, and it wasn't going to be easy. In 1950, George's family moved once again, this time to the East Coast. George changed schools frequently until he arrived at the GF Coast Military Academy in Mississippi. It was at this military school that George Hamilton's character was shaped, making him more resilient and decisive in the years that followed. The military school taught George Hamilton many valuable lessons, from discipline and posture to charm, all of which would later help him stand out in his career. There, George caught attention not only for his refined manners, but also for his calm demeanor. However, behind that polished exterior, George's personal life contained dark secrets that he had been facing since his youth. One of the major secrets George kept hidden for decades was his complicated and distorted relationship with his stepmother, a relationship that began before he even reached his teenage years. This relationship had a significant impact on him throughout his life and became a crucial part of his tumultuous life story. In 1958, when George was 19, his life took a new turn. After an audition with MGM, he received an unexpected opportunity. Despite lacking formal training, George only had a high school acting award and a natural charisma. At that time, he was still struggling financially, but with the trust of an agent, MGM offered him a chance. With $500 for a role in Crime and Punishment USA, George began his journey into the world of Hollywood. Although he wasn't the director's first choice, they preferred Anthony Perkins. George shocked everyone with his performance. With a fierce portrayal, he not only stunned audiences, but also won a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. He was also nominated for a BAFTA. However, Hollywood still didn't take him seriously. To secure a television appearance, George had to bribe someone with a bottle of Jack Daniels. This reflected the harsh reality of the industry. One day you could be the next big star, but the next, you'd be struggling to find work. At this point, George made another bold move. He began tanning his skin deeply and darkly, a style not just for beauty, but to create his own brand. In a Hollywood full of handsome actors, the tan made George stand out and quickly became his signature look. His playful rivalry with actor John Derek over who could achieve a darker tan became one of the most intriguing aspects of his early years in Hollywood. George Hamilton made his tan an inseparable part of his personal identity. He not only saw it as a symbol of charm, but also as a way to maintain his presence in the film industry when acting opportunities began to dwindle. He took pride in his style, sometimes joking about it, and used it as a tool to stand out in Hollywood. It wasn't just a physical change, it was a way for him to assert his personality in a highly competitive industry. In 1960, George starred in Where the Boys Are, playing the role of a wealthy and refined college boy. The film was a massive success, reflecting a part of America undergoing change. While the original book had a political theme, the film chose to skip this element and instead delivered a light-hearted romantic story. George felt the movie was somewhat silly, but the audience loved it. He even improvised one of the film's most iconic scenes, writing a question mark in the sand next to his co-star. That moment helped George cement his image as a charming heartthrob in the eyes of the viewers. Where the Boys Are was not just an entertaining film, but also reflected the changing cultural landscape of America, especially in how people were beginning to approach sexuality and romance. Decades later, Scholars pointed out that George's role became an important part of the broader conversation about gender, flirtation, and popular culture during that era. In 1965, George continued to capture attention with his role as Hank Williams, which led him to a dinner at the White House where he met Linda Bird Johnson, the daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson. Linda was a bookish, quiet young woman with a calm demeanor, but beneath that exterior there was a wildness that George easily recognized. Despite coming from Hollywood with his bold personality, George found a connection with her. The romance between George and Linda quickly became a national topic of conversation. They appeared together at red carpet events, traveled to Acapulco, and even captured attention at the Academy Awards. One of the famous jokes from Bob Hope was, "She doesn't need a watch because she already has a Hamilton." However, not everyone smiled at this relationship. President Lyndon B. Johnson was displeased with the relationship. He was not only concerned about his daughter dating a Hollywood actor, but also had deeper suspicions. In order to protect his family, President Johnson requested a special investigation by the FBI, one that went beyond a simple background check and became deeply personal. He called on Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to be involved in the investigation. The FBI didn't just conduct a background check on George Hamilton, they dug deep into every corner of his life. They wanted to know everything, from his friends, credit cards, and family, to rumors about his sexual orientation. George's brother was gay, and just that fact alone made George fear that unfounded rumors could ruin his career. At that time, a rumor about one's sexual orientation could completely destroy a person's reputation and career in the entertainment industry. The FBI continued their investigation, but nothing harmful came to light about George. Things took a more tense turn when George received an unexpected call from the White House. He was instructed to come to Texas immediately, challenge of manhood with no questions asked. Upon landing, President Lyndon B. Johnson led him straight into the woods, handed him a gun, and stared at him as if to say, "This isn't about the deer." George understood that this was not a typical hunting trip. It was a challenge, a test of manhood, loyalty, and self-control. George quickly got into action, fired the shot, and even impressed President Johnson. Eventually, Johnson smiled and referred to him as Daniel Boone, comparing him to the legendary frontiersman. However, George realized that the hunt itself was a test for him. It wasn't just about his hunting skills. It was a challenge to see if he had the strength and decisiveness to handle the pressure from one of the most powerful families in America. Meanwhile, another political storm was brewing: George's military draft. He had avoided military service by claiming he needed to care for his mother and brothers, but journalists and officials soon uncovered the deceit. His mother lived a luxurious life in Beverly Hills, which made this excuse unacceptable to President Johnson. Amid the growing tensions of the Vietnam War, Johnson could not accept that someone dating his daughter was evading military duty. Although Johnson didn't say it outright, the message was crystal clear: either join the war or leave his family. This pressure became too much for George to bear. His romantic relationship with Linda ended in late 1966. However, George didn't burn any bridges. When Linda married Marine Corps Captain Charles Robb in 1967, George attended the wedding, smiling and posing for pictures as if it were just another Hollywood event. Although the romantic relationship between George Hamilton and Linda Bird Johnson had ended long ago, he maintained contact with the Robb family for many years afterward. When Charles Robb became the governor of Virginia, George was still invited to important events. In 2012, when everything had settled down, the Robb family came to see George perform on stage in Washington, D.C. They even invited him to dinner. Despite the passing of many decades, the bond never completely faded. George realized that, although he never became the son-in-law of the president, he had come closer than any Hollywood actor ever did in the 1960s. By the late 1970s, Hollywood's attention on George Hamilton had faded. However, a strange yet brilliant turning point came in 1979. George played Count Dracula in the comedy Love at First Bite. No one expected the film to succeed, but Hamilton not only starred in it, but also helped produce it. The film became an unexpected hit as George's Dracula was not only serious, but also danced to disco music and told jokes. The public loved this humorous and unique style. Thanks to the unexpected success of Love at First Bite, Hollywood began to view George Hamilton in a new light. Not only was he seen as a handsome actor, but he was also appreciated for his sense of humor and business acumen. The film made a lot of money and helped Hamilton return to the center of Hollywood. It was a major turning point in his career, completely changing the way people saw him. Outside of his career, George's personal life also had its fair share of unexpected twists. In 1972, he got married in an unconventional way. While hanging out with Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, George's girlfriend, Alana Collins, stopped by to pick up some things before flying back to England. Out of nowhere, Parker unexpectedly suggested that they get married that very day, and they did. On Elvis's private jet, in Elvis's private room, with a judge waiting and a small dog standing in as the maid of honor, they even played roulette before officially tying the knot. The love story between George and Alana began many years earlier in Acapulco, where they couldn't stand each other at first. But through a pinch, a slap, and a brief romance, they unexpectedly grew close. 2 years later, their son Ashley was born. For someone once famous for being a playboy, George Hamilton became an unexpectedly devoted father, proving that he could care for a family in a completely different way. While filming Medusa in Greece, George Hamilton turned the job into a meaningful honeymoon for his family. Later, their son Ashley grew up to become an actor, appearing in well-known films like Beethoven's Second and Iron Man 3. Despite George and Alana's divorce, they continued to raise Ashley together, demonstrating that their care and love for their son remained unaffected by the end of their marriage. George was not only a good father to his own son, but also built a close relationship with Alana's children from her later marriage to Rod Stewart. Although their family dynamic was different and didn't follow the traditional mold, they successfully maintained a happy and united family. While most divorces in Hollywood are cold or filled with turmoil, George and Alana's remained amicable and harmonious. Although George and Alana parted ways in 1975, they never truly let go of each other. They remained close friends, talking daily and having dinner together. Alana would drive because George was often late, and although they joked about remarrying, they didn't feel the need to. Their relationship was so strong and stable that George admitted that after their divorce, He realized he had missed something important, and that was Alana. They had moved beyond the boundaries of a couple, forming a deeper and more meaningful connection. A new storm hit George in 1979 when he flew to the Philippines to promote the comedy Love at First Bite. At the time, George's career was at its peak, and no one could have predicted that a lunch at the presidential palace would change everything. There, George met First Lady Imelda Marcos, who was immediately captivated by him. Their relationship developed quickly. They traveled the world together, shopped, and even sang together. However, what seemed like a harmless friendship soon revealed much darker secrets. That same year, George also met two key figures in Imelda Marcos's inner circle. Antonio Florendo, a wealthy businessman who had made his fortune through dealings with the Marcos regime, and Glitzy Tantico, Imelda's closest friend and personal shopping agent. These were not just minor characters. They played a crucial role in a series of secret transactions and shady loans involving millions of dollars that somehow passed through Hamilton's hands. What do you think about the roles of Antonio Florendo and Glitzy Tantico in these events? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exciting videos in the future. In 1982, George received a $600,000 loan from Florendo. George claimed that the loan was for refinancing his Mississippi plantation, but the timing of the loan raised suspicions. The loan came just 2 months after George attended the lavish Manila Film Festival, where guests drank $100 French champagne and dined on roast beef. Later, investigators uncovered that these transactions were linked to illegal activities, setting off a chain of events that drew George into financial suspicions and connections to the Marcos regime. Around $12 million may have flowed through George Hamilton's accounts. In one instance, he even flew to Hong Kong to collect $5.5 million from Glitzy Tantico's bank account. Prosecutors suspected that this money was part of dark financial dealings, allegedly coming directly from the Philippine Treasury. Shortly after, Hamilton began renovating his Beverly Hills home, building a massive garage, and expanding his living space. Investigators believed that the money had been used to pay for these renovations. Not only did Hamilton upgrade his home, but he was also rumored to have been involved in purchasing the adjacent property, possibly to expand his estate. Some even suspected that the house may not have actually belonged to Hamilton from the start, but was instead a Marcos-owned property hidden under his name. These suspicions only added to the ambiguity surrounding Hamilton's financial transactions. The craziest turning point in George Hamilton's life involved a failed film project he was involved in. Initially, Hamilton planned to make a war action movie about General Douglas MacArthur. However, under the influence of Imelda Marcos's inner circle, the script was changed into a romantic drama about MacArthur's unrequited love for a Filipino woman. Hamilton later admitted that the film was embarrassing, with MacArthur's famous line, "I shall return," turned into a love message rather than a wartime declaration. Ultimately, the film was never made, and the $5.5 million was quietly returned to a bank in Hong Kong. Prosecutors later claimed that the entire incident was a cover-up, a money laundering scheme to transfer stolen funds from illegal dealings. By 1988, George Hamilton's name appeared in a federal indictment, although he was not directly charged. However, he was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a case against Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. This was a major blow to George's image, especially as he defended himself in the press, claiming he was merely a friend and had never been involved in any business dealings with Imelda Marcos. However, the truth was much more complicated. George Hamilton admitted to receiving millions of dollars from transactions related to the Marcoses and testified in court. Although his lawyers tried to paint him as an innocent Southern gentleman who never engaged in business dealings, his testimony and continued defense of the Marcoses, even after they were accused of stealing over $100 million from the people of the Philippines, tarnished his previously spotless image. George Hamilton claimed that he didn't know where the money came from and returned everything once he realized something was wrong. However, behind the scenes, the story didn't add up. Florendo, who had lent money to Hamilton, later admitted that it was Imelda Marcos who was pulling the strings. She was the one who decided where the money went, who controlled it, and how it was used. Some even suspected that Hamilton's house might be part of her hidden empire. In court, Hamilton admitted that he may have been exploited, but never intentionally. Although he avoided official charges, the damage had already been done. His friendship with Imelda had pulled him into one of the biggest corruption scandals of the 20th century. Millions of dollars had vanished, his reputation was tarnished, and a forgotten war film may have helped cover it all up. In the mid-1980s, while filming Poker Alice, George Hamilton had a special collaboration with Elizabeth Taylor. Not only were they colleagues on screen, but they also developed a romantic relationship that lasted about a year. After their breakup, they remained close friends. A real shock came when Elizabeth sent George a parting gift: a solid gold Cartier playing card with the inscription on the back reading, "Dear George, I love you, even though you're an asshole." George found it hilarious and realized that it wasn't just a joke, but a strange yet sweet way for Elizabeth to express her affection. Elizabeth Taylor was not the only beauty in George Hamilton's life. In a 2009 appearance on a reality TV show, George revealed a shocking detail. He had dated at least 4 Miss World winners. Although he didn't name them, the message was clear. George had a particular type of partner, and that type was global royal beauties who wore high heels. In the 60s and 70s, George was everywhere, from red carpets to movie sets, magazine covers, and always with another beautiful woman on his arm. Even Burt Reynolds once joked about this, gifting George a birthday card with a collage of Tony Curtis and Anthony Perkins, captioned, "George, love from Mom and Dad." George found it hilarious and was always ready to share the joke with others. In 1995, George's love life took a significant turn when he met Kimberly Blackford, a 20-year-old swimsuit model, while he was 56. Hollywood wasn't too shocked by this. It was just George being himself. However, this wasn't just a brief fling. George and Kimberly were together for 4 years and had a son named George Thomas Hamilton, or GT. Although George didn't marry Kimberly, he remained an active and devoted father in his son's life. GT was raised with the discipline of the old-school approach, just like George had raised his older son, Ashley. The age gap between father and son was vast, 60 years, yet their bond was strong in a way that surprised and impressed everyone. George Hamilton saw his son GT as a calm, ambitious, and polite young man. For George, this was his second chance to be a father in the right way, and he didn't miss the opportunity. Their relationship grew stronger and closer, and George considered GT an integral part of his life. Even George's ex-wife, Alana Stewart, maintained a close relationship with him. After their divorce, Alana married Rod Stewart and had 2 more children, Kimberly and Sean. While most people might have distanced themselves after such changes, George did not. He stepped into the lives of Rod's children as a second father. Despite the complex family situation, somehow it worked. The entire blended family even appeared on a reality TV show in 2015 called Stewarts and Hamiltons. The show was quirky, funny, but also incredibly heartwarming as the family shared moments of their lives together. George and Alana maintained a close friendship, talking daily, visiting each other, having dinner and chatting like old friends. Alana even drove because George was always late. After all the marriages and divorces, they found something that resembled a real family. However, George's life wasn't always easy. As a child, he contracted measles and lost hearing in his left ear. It was something he kept hidden for many years, and most people were unaware of the issue. After being examined, doctors confirmed it was permanent nerve damage, and George accepted that he would have to live with the impairment. However, an old friend, Gloria Swanson, helped George find an experimental treatment. Gloria Swanson advised George to go to Switzerland to try an experimental treatment involving stem cells, long before stem cell therapy became a widely recognized technology. The procedure was painful, expensive, and completely outside the realm of conventional treatments. But unexpectedly, it worked. Gradually, George's hearing began to recover, and within a month he regained 95% of what he had lost. George recalled that the clinic was filled with celebrities who quietly came in hoping to find their own miracle. It was like a secret society of the wealthy and famous, all seeking their last hope. Many years later, in 2025, George faced a new fear. By then, his heart valve had failed. At 86 years old, most people would prepare for the worst. However, George Hamilton was not like others. Despite facing serious health issues, he refused to give up hope and continued to fight through every challenge. George Hamilton underwent open-heart surgery, and within just 2 days, he was able to leave the hospital. His doctors couldn't believe the rapid recovery. Within weeks, he was walking, lifting light weights, and doing stretching exercises. His heart rate had dropped to the level of an athlete's. George believed that all of this was thanks to his diet, which included a daily smoothie filled with kale, almonds, bananas, and any green superfoods he could find. George's recovery amazed his doctors so much that they began documenting his process to apply it to other patients. However, George didn't stop there. He did something no one expected. He launched his own skincare line. Yes, the man famous for tanning like it was a full-time job suddenly started selling creams promising to repair sun damage. The product line was called the George Hamilton Skincare System, and it promised to restore skin overnight. One product in the line even claimed it could reverse years of sun damage while you slept. This claim made dermatologists shake their heads, but it didn't stop people from buying. In its first year, the product line brought in over $4 million. George turned shopping malls into red carpets, charming women with champagne and beauty tips. However, like most trends, The shine eventually faded as new celebrities entered the skincare market. By 1993, George's products had quietly disappeared from the shelves. However, he didn't give up on selling sunscreen. Around the same time, George opened a chain of tanning salons just as doctors were warning about the cancer risks of tanning. George disagreed with the experts, insisting that his tanning beds were safer and provided people with a little fun and color. Despite experts deeming it absurd and dangerous, his tanning salons thrived, raking in millions of dollars across California, Florida, and Arizona. However, George's period of success didn't last forever. In 1992, customers began suing after they developed skin cancer from using his tanning services. These lawsuits severely damaged the reputation and success of George's tanning salon chain, forcing him to face a major crisis in his business career. George Hamilton stabilized after the challenges in his career, but the damage had already been done. The tipping point came in 2011 when he had to have cancerous cells removed from his skin, marking the end of the tanning empire he had built. Once a master of a popular trend, he now faced serious consequences. Years passed, and when people thought George had disappeared from the spotlight, he made an incredible comeback. In 2016, at the age of 77, George became the crispy colonel for KFC in a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign. While other actors were begging for roles, George seized an opportunity to shine by doing what he did best, embracing his tan and laughing at himself. He joked about the dangers of the sun while dressing up as Colonel Sanders. The commercials went viral, sales skyrocketed, and George suddenly became a famous icon once again. Not just an advertising campaign, this comeback was also a masterclass in self-marketing. George proved that he could survive through just about anything and knew how to leverage himself to build his image. But his return didn't stop at the commercials. In 2009, George participated in the British reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, charming a new audience by surviving in the jungle. Although he didn't win, George built a massive fan base and received numerous invitations to appear on other television shows. In 2015, George even had his own reality TV show, Stewarts and Hamiltons, providing a chance for the cameras to capture the unique life of his blended family. The show didn't last long, but it served its purpose, especially in introducing George's teenage son, GT, to the public. It was also a reminder that George Hamilton remained a brand worth watching. At the beginning of 2025, George once again attracted attention, not for his acting, but for his decision to move to Palm Beach. At 85, people assumed he was simply seeking a place with a better climate. However, the truth was much darker. Over the past 4 years, George had lost $12 million to a dishonest business manager who lured him into fraudulent real estate deals. By relocating to Florida, George was able to protect what remained, thanks to the state's generous property laws. In doing so, he turned a near bankruptcy into another smart turnaround. George reconnected with the local community, joking about running for mayor and continuing to prove that he could survive through nearly every challenge. Despite being nearly 86 years old, George had no intention of slowing down. He spoke about living to 100 as if it were just another chapter in his life. Each day began at 5:30 a.m. with meditation and swimming. demonstrating that George was not only enjoying life, but also finding ways to live healthily and full of energy. George Hamilton eats as if he's still living in the Mediterranean, attributing his energy to his curiosity and dedication to new film projects. Despite facing health challenges, these fears don't hold him back. In fact, they only make him stronger. George's story is not just about personal reinvention, but also about family, a crucial element in his life. George has 2 sons, and he admits that he raised them in different ways. His firstborn, Ashley, was born during the peak years of George's career. However, during that time, George was hardly present in his son's life. But with his youngest son, GT, who was born when George was 60, everything changed. George slowed down, made time, and prioritized fatherhood. He and GT traveled the world together, built trust, and even collaborated on a reality TV show. George says that GT gave him a second chance, not just in fatherhood, but also in life. Politics has always been closely intertwined with George's life, dating back to the 1960s. When he dated the daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, he had the opportunity to enter the White House and interact with key figures in American politics. Over the years, George maintained relationships with both sides, always keeping a polite and neutral stance. This connection allowed him to maintain influence and gain a deeper understanding of politics. Now, George's son, GT, is stepping into politics on his own, driving change and carrying the Hamilton name into the next generation. George not only sees a continuation of his family legacy, but also recognizes that the values and experiences he has accumulated have been passed down to the next generation, allowing them to continue contributing to the community and society in their own way. Thank you for watching this video. What do you think about George's son, GT, entering politics and continuing the family values? Do you think this legacy is important? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us. Leave a 1 if you think this legacy is a great thing, or a 0 if you have a different opinion.